Well, welcome. My name is Meg Brooks Swift, and I'm a Senior Associate Dean of Admissions and excited to be here tonight to share some insights and advice for application writing. I am joined by my colleague, Libby.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. My name is Libby Bergeron, and I'm an Associate Dean of Admissions here at Bowdoin.
So Libby will be taking your questions over the course of the program. So as I continue with the program, please feel free to add any questions you have into the Q&A, and Libby will be responding. And then when we get to the end, we will address some of those questions that may be more common to the whole group. So with that, I will go ahead and get started. So as I said, we have a number of objectives here this evening, one of which is to emphasize why your writing matters. We want to explore what you should aim to convey over the course of your application. We're going to talk about the many different places where your writing appears. And I think it's easy to assume that your writing is just in the essays, but we will show you tonight how your writing actually comes up in all different places throughout the application. We're also going to reveal some tips for effective self-presentation. So just a few disclaimers. I'm going to be referencing the common application in my slides, but today's insights and advice can be applied to other platforms like the Coalition application or the QuestBridge application too. And obviously I work for Bowdoin, and this presentation draws inspiration from our application review process, but I'm hopeful that you'll walk away from this feeling encouraged and optimistic about completing applications for a whole variety of schools. We appreciate that students apply to many different schools, and we hope that tonight can be helpful, not only if you apply to Bowdoin, but for the other schools that you choose to apply to this fall or later if you're not a senior. So again, we hope to answer your questions, so please take advantage of that Q&A box. So why does your writing matter? How you present yourself in your application is really a great way for us to understand not only how you will perform in your future classroom, but also how you will contribute to the various different extracurricular opportunities at your future college. Outside of an interview, and many schools don't offer interviews now, this is your opportunity to have a conversation with us. And we see this as a way to really get to know you in a very complete way through lots of different opportunities to learn more about what's important to you and what you value. So what should you aim to convey? I think the most obvious are strong writing skills. Everything you've heard from English teachers, other humanities teachers throughout your schooling. We want to see proper spelling, proper grammar, punctuation that makes sense, capitalization of the appropriate words. It's always nice when we can see varied sentence structures and descriptive vocabulary. We're also looking for good judgment. We look for details that will help connect the dots of different stories that you share. And we're also looking for restraint and tact when it makes sense, so that you're sharing the appropriate amount of detail and not too much. We're also looking for perspective. This is our opportunity to understand your outlook on the world and your developing values and thoughts on the larger perspective of your contributions and involvement on a college campus. We're also looking for self-awareness and empathy. We hope that your spirit and personality will come through, and so we're looking for that in lots of different ways. So where does your writing appear? The most obvious, as I said, comes through our writing samples. You will have the personal statement that is the required part of an application and is one that you can use to as many different schools as you apply. And it also comes in the supplemental essays. So these are usually the optional prompts that different schools will ask you to respond, typically shorter than the personal statement, but an opportunity to talk more specifically about why you're interested in their school. But the writing really comes up throughout the application. And sometimes it's in places that you might not expect. So in these next slides, we're going to walk through each section and discuss why your writing matters and what you should aim to convey. I'll tell you what we see from our side as admissions officers and give you the tools to consider your self-presentation throughout the application. So in our review process, we get to the background. This is the first part of the application that we read. And the profile will give you an opportunity to ease into the polished self-presentation you'll aim to deliver throughout the application. And I think in this early part, some of this seems very obvious, and it goes back to some of those things I mentioned earlier: spelling, proper capitalization. All of this is really important in this very basic background information. We also have the opportunity to learn more about your family, who you live with in your home. This is your chance to share who that is. In the education section, you are given the opportunity to expand in different areas, and your writing will come out here, especially in sections such as your current or most recent year courses, where you are going to have to write out what you're taking. So again, making sure you're capitalizing things correctly, that you're spelling things correctly. With the honors and awards, if you have received an award with the simple description is not very clear, it could behoove you to describe it a little bit more as the character limit allows. If you're working with a community-based organization and it's an acronym, please share what the full meaning of that is. Take the extra time to explain some of this when you have the space, and we have a chance to see how you've provided more information and bring your writing into play. So again, just make sure you're being detailed and thorough throughout this background section, which I think is on the surface not an area where you think your writing really matters. But this is where you're going to start off strong and make sure that your application appears very professional. So once we've established information about your personal and academic background, we dive into your activities as you've presented them. So this is where we learn how you spend your time outside of the classroom. And this can be in a whole number of different areas, whether it's a job or traditional high school sanctioned events, whether that's Model UN or a varsity sport. Maybe it's an online language class you've taken or independent research. You potentially have been really involved in a summer program, maybe taken advantage of a term time internship. All of these areas are where we hope you will share how you're spending your time. There is no right or wrong way to describe those activities and list those activities. And I think it's important to remember that the activity section is really much more than a bulleted list. It's an opportunity to show us your writing skills. It allows you to have your personality come through. It's limited by character counts, so you're going to have to choose what words you use and try to be as succinct as possible while still describing what it is that you do. I also want to emphasize that while you will be given the opportunity to describe 10 different activities, length does not dictate quality. So we want to know how you spend your time, but we also don't want you to feel as though you need to fill up every blank spot. What you do is important in its own right, whether it's 3 activities or 10 activities. So I'm going to give you a few examples to give you a sense of how, in something as simple as the activities section, the way you write it can really help your application have some personality. So for every activity, you will have a drop-down list of categories. In this section, it is student government and politics. You'll also be able to indicate when you have participated. This student has listed 11th and 12th grade and that it's during the school year. You will also be able to share how many hours a week and how many weeks a year. And then that last line is that you are choosing to continue this activity in college. Now, a few things here to look at. Class rep, you can see that we have those first 2 letters capitalized. That looks as though it was done pretty quickly, may not have been reread. It might be helpful to have that spelt out in a more thoughtful way. Rep is abbreviated, certainly not a situation where you are limited by characters. And then the student has passed on the opportunity to describe anything more about what that role is as a class rep. So that is a very simplistic view of what they do. And as an admissions reader, I'm not sure I really understand that. So here I'm going to give you a second example. You can see that we've now spelled it out. It's a full class representative. They are telling us that they were voted in the 11th and 12th grade, and then things get cut off as part of my schools, and we don't hear the rest. And then that student voice committee is thrown in, and we don't have a great sense of what that means. So then we get to this third take on this activity, where we can see a lot more information. They're a class representative for the student voice committee, and it's described how they were elected into this role, what their contribution is through these weekly meetings, and how they plan projects and bring awareness to the school community. So with this last example, with the help of some thoughtful writing and a view as to what the reader might not know when they just see a listing of the position, we get a much better sense of the role that that student plays. So we'll go to a second example here. And we can see again, they've taken a very simple description. They're a bagger, they're a cashier. This was a summer job at the local grocery store. This second example shows that we are now know that they're working at the green grocer. So we have a little bit more perspective of what they're doing. And we're seeing that they received this promotion and what they learned and how those skills could contribute to their ongoing development. And so this final example, they're adding some additional information. We learn a lot more, not only about the role, but it's really fun that they've added in this extra section that the earnings went towards a new bike, which means 10 extra minutes of sleep now that I don't walk to school. So in this final example, you can see how if you leverage the writing in your activities lists to show us your strength as a candidate, you'll be one step closer to standing out in the process. So after reading your activities, we move on to your personal statement. And indeed, there is a lot of heavy lifting that the personal statement will do for your application overall. So many people will look at the personal statement as the best way to learn about the student within an application. For most readers, this is a chance to read 650 words or so about you. It is your chance to tell us something that is important to you. Writing is limited by the word count, and formatting doesn't always carry over. So if you are thinking of putting something in Word with lots of italics and bold and various margin issues, keep in mind that it may not easily transfer over into the application platform that you're using. And even more so than in the activities that you listed, this is where you really get to show your skill in writing, your good judgment, and your perspective. So with any of the applications you choose to use, you will have a number of different prompts for that personal statement. Every year, I always refer students to number 7 there, because if you are stuck and feel as though these first 6 do not give you a sense of what you want to say, you can default to that share an essay on any topic of your choice. But as you can see through the first 6, the different ideas that you are provided give you a chance to talk about your own background. Maybe you choose to tell us about an obstacle and the great learning that you've had that may help flag for us your opportunities for later success. You may reflect on a time when you were challenged. Sometimes we'll see students writing about relationships. So number 4 there, reflect on something or someone that has done something for you that has made you happy or thankful. Is there an accomplishment or an event that you want to talk about that shows some great growth? Or is there a topic that you find so engaging, so fascinating that you want to tell us more about? So as you are thinking about different topics to use, hopefully these prompts will help get you to the point where you are ready to take off and begin your draft. So as you begin that process, there are lots of different ways you can go ahead and approach the essay. And here are a few things to keep in mind as you go through. So you want to find a prompt that resonates with you. This is your essay after all. It should not be one that you think we want to read, that we are eager to know more about. We most of all want to know what is important to you. So pick the prompt that speaks most strongly to you. Reflect on your experience. This is an essay with your voice, with your story, with your experience, not with someone else's. We don't care about something that your parents experienced or your younger siblings or your best friend. This should be about your experience. Also, it's important in an essay to really zoom in to a topic rather than trying to skim across a lot of different areas. So take the time to delve deeply into a story or a situation or an experience rather than trying to cover lots of different areas and really just scratch the surface of any of those. Focus on the present more than the past. I've often read essays that reflect on a student's experience when they were 5 or 6 years old. And I find myself wondering, has there been nothing in the last 12 or 13 years that's more important than that day? And so while there could be a very appropriate way to write about something that was very important in your life that was years ago, I think as you think about the topic, focusing on the present more than the past can be more helpful. And then again, we often go back to the English teachers. It's about showing and not telling. So take that extra time to think about ways that you can describe and share a situation rather than just telling us what happened. And probably the golden rule in all of this is to edit and proofread. You should be starting your essay with plenty of time so that you can put it aside for a few days, come back days later, reread it with a clean slate and with a new perspective. You want to just make sure that you are editing your essay and not just dashing it off the night before it's due and pushing submit. So as you select your topic and work towards a final draft, I think it's important to keep a few more things in mind. First of all, your personal statement is not a cover letter. This should not be a regurgitation of your list of activities. It is okay to use a dialogue. We find that some students like to tell a story that involves the voices of different people. If you are wanting to start in the middle of the action, you are welcome to do any of this. Any other compelling writing techniques that you feel will really share your story will be an important part of your essay. One thing or two areas that I often try to make students understand is that there are certainly some overused as well as underused topics. Now, those of us who are reading applications, many of us have read thousands and thousands of essays. So it is likely that we have read about your summer camp experience or a wonderful service trip that changed your life or a championship game in your high school soccer season. That's not to say you can't write on that, but if you do decide to write about one of those topics, it simply means that readers may hold you to a higher standard because yours will be one of many essays about how much you love your camp or the lessons of teamwork you learned during that championship game. But I think the underused topics deserve some equal time here. And I think that sometimes you can get you can think that a topic that seems very generic, whether it be your job or a family dinner or a simple experience, will be really boring for a reader. I think it's important to remember that the way you write about that and how you share some of these very mundane moments can be a really wonderful opportunity for you to share a particular story so that we can learn more about you. It's not about standing out. It's about letting us in and sharing something in your life that you think is important to have us know more about as a way of getting to understand you. I think there are a lot of myths out there that the best essays will be written about hardship. And while there certainly have been some wonderful stories of how students have overcome some really challenging situations, I think there is nothing about a hardship essay that means it will be a success. In a similar vein, I think students sometimes feel as though they need to show that they have done something incredible. They have had some groundbreaking research or a hike summiting a major mountain. But sometimes it's just really important to be able to talk about the day-to-day life. And as much as I said it's important to edit, you need to know the fine line between over-editing. And when it comes time to polishing your work, you want to make sure that your thesaurus is used as, say, a distant cousin rather than your best friend. You want to include rich and varied vocabulary, but your personal statement should seem natural and as though you actually wrote it. So if you do find a trusted friend or mentor to review your drafts, make sure their edits are not eliminating your voice. At the end of the day, we want this to be your personal statement and not the personal statement of your English teacher or your parents. So at this point in the application, we've learned about you in a lot of different ways. We've gotten information about your background, about how you spend your time through your activities and what you find meaningful. We're also going to learn more from your transcript and your teacher recommendations. So when we talk about application writing relative to the additional information section, it's important to remember that this is a space that will round out the picture and give us a little bit more context, if that makes sense. So since 2020, all students have had an opportunity to indicate how COVID-19 has affected their lives in and out of school. So if you feel as though, for those of you that are seniors out there, I believe you started high school in the height of the pandemic, and you probably took your first high school classes virtually from your kitchen table. You may want to write about your own health during that time, or challenges to the access to technology, or a family disruption. But if you don't feel now 3 years later that that's overly relevant, you should not feel as though you need to add to that section. You also have an opportunity in this additional information to add other parts of your life that you feel are not addressed in other ways. And so some examples we've seen are if there have been some recent home changes or disruptions. Have there been personal challenges that you've experienced that haven't been covered in other areas? Are there additional academic contexts that you don't think your recommenders will write about and are not obvious from your transcript itself? You may decide that you want to add a resume or an additional piece of creative writing, for instance. Any of this information can be added, but I think it's worth reminding you that if you feel as though your application will be incomplete without it, you should definitely include it here. But you should also think carefully about whether you've already included some of this information elsewhere in your application. As readers, we are attentive and really only need to see something once to make notes of it, which means you don't need to make more work for yourself and add more writing if you've been thorough in other sections of your applications, especially since we have a couple more writing sections to talk about. So with that, we will turn to supplemental essays. And for those of you who have looked at different schools where you might be applying and what their supplemental essays are, you'll probably see a great range of what those questions are. In many cases, this is your opportunity to be able to share with us what you see your fit and your connection and your real value or love of that particular institution is. Supplemental essays are often asking you to respond to a prompt that allows you to address either the ethos of the institution or how you can tell us why you want to attend. So regardless of what that supplemental essay prompt is, it's really important to take the time to think about what that prompt is asking you. And so in many cases, this may force you to do some additional research to be able to understand what it is about the culture or the value of that institution that really speaks to you. So you're probably going to have to draft a variety of supplemental essays depending on how many schools you plan to apply to. And this is where I can't emphasize enough the starting early. If you were to keep a list of all the different supplemental essays you might need to draft, depending on how many schools you're applying to start early and draft the specific part for each school will save you time in the long run. And if you do copy and paste, this is just a quick warning, make sure that you don't forget to change the school name. I am a big fan of the other small liberal arts colleges in our state. We have Bates and Colby to the north, and I regularly will read in the Bowdoin supplemental essay about why a student really wants to go to Bates. So make sure you do that final round of editing. And then really pay attention to what is optional versus required, and embrace those suggested chances to showcase your writing. But don't feel as though you need to jump in on every optional part of an application. So I want to give you a little bit of a sense of what we're looking for at Bowdoin. This is, after all, a Bowdoin presentation. And so we have a number of different ways in our supplemental application for you to share more information about your own interest in Bowdoin and the writing that will come along with that. So the first question is asking you how you first learned about Bowdoin. This is a very short space. There's only 140 characters. Some students will just say they heard about it in a mailing. Other students may have a funny story of how they stumbled upon Bowdoin in a college guide and they didn't know how to pronounce it. Whatever speaks to you is what you should include in this situation. The next optional part of our supplemental essay is something reflecting on what we call the offer of the college. This was written by our 7th president back in the early 1900s, and it is a poem that speaks to everything you will get out of a Bowdoin education. And we ask you to tell us which line resonates most for you, and you just get to select an option. And then if you choose, you can write a 250-word statement about why that line is what speaks to you. And again, speaking to what it is about a school that draws you in, this is your chance to tell us why Bowdoin. As a small college, we only have 1,850 students on the campus at any one time. We are a small community where students are learning from each other in so many different ways, and we want to make sure that the students we're bringing to campus have identified the different components of a Bowdoin experience that really speak to them. So this is a really fun essay for us to read. Students will interpret the offer in lots of different ways, and the lines they pick really share a lot more information about what's important about in your application. And then finally, last year, we added an additional optional question where we're inviting you to share something about your unique experiences and perspectives that you'll bring to the Bowdoin campus. We are a very diverse community, and we want to see ways that students have already navigated differences and how you might do that at Bowdoin. So these various options may seem like a cumbersome number of supplemental essays. They are all optional, except for the line from the offer that you pick. You don't need to write about why, but you do need to tell us, pick which line it is. So another chance for you to submit additional information. We're asking you to use good judgment. You don't need to repeat information that exists earlier in your common application. But if they're Bowdoin specific information here, this is a great opportunity for you to share that. Another place that we will see your writing is through email correspondence, and many students will choose to reach out to us. And this is a chance. It may seem a little bit sneaky. You probably think you're just dashing off an email, but to keep in mind that it is one more way that we see your writing. You really can make an impression in your correspondence. So you want to show proficient writing skills and good judgment. Personality can often come through. I think it's a reminder in the days of text that when you're writing in an email, you shouldn't be using abbreviations that you use in text, that you should be writing in full sentences and making sure the spelling makes sense. So if you plan to reach out to a college or university, there are a few questions you should ask yourself. And again, not everyone is going to email an admissions officer, but if you do, just some things to keep in mind. Are you contacting the right person? You will find in many offices, they will online have a list of who the admissions officer is and what territories they might cover. Have you done enough research from what is available very quickly there on the website? By asking a question that they've already addressed on the website, it may show that you really haven't taken any time. And does your message look and sound professional? So I'm going to give you a couple of examples here just to try to make sense of what I'm explaining as it relates to email. So here is the first one, a very generic, we're not even addressing a specific person, asking about virtual interviews. I know on the Bowdoin website, for instance, you can find out about interviewing with probably 2 clicks from our main admissions page. So this is showing here that you haven't really done your research. And I'd say this final sentence about, can you please tell me a bit more about the school, is so vague that it's hard to know as an admissions officer how I would even respond. I don't know anything you're interested in. I don't know if there's a particular academic area that you wanted to know more about, or are you curious about the residential aspect? This is just overly vague, and it makes it challenging to know how to respond. And we find ourselves wondering really how we can help and what the student was doing prior to emailing us. So a second example that is a little bit more specific and really shows that you've taken that extra time. You found out that I'm your admissions officer, you're addressing me by name, you're telling me where you are coming from, you're recognizing that I'm your regional representative, and you are asking a very simple question. You did a virtual interview last week, and you are really eager to get the email address of the person that interviewed you. You forgot to ask, but you would love to have that one piece of information. And so this is it's a very nicely written, it's a very clear and specific, and we get a really good sense of the student's interest here, and I would say their kindness and their professionalism and their maturity comes through. So in the end, I think if you do your research and take the time to think about what you're saying, which you do every single day as students, it will be easy to come across in a positive light when you're reaching out to schools. Now, I just want to say a couple of things about ChatGPT. I think as admissions officers, we recognize that artificial intelligence is here. It's here to stay. It's unlikely that it's going away. I know there are probably some schools that may be specifically checking to see if an essay used ChatGPT. That is not a policy that we have at Bowdoin at this point. But you should keep in mind that some schools may be focusing on that. I think in the admissions industry, we are recognizing that ChatGPT is just one more way that students can receive extra help. We know right now that whether you are using ChatGPT or you're getting edits from a friend or a teacher, You may be getting help, and that is okay. But ultimately, it is your voice we want to hear. We want the voice and the descriptions and the story that comes through on that page to be from you, the 17 or 18-year-old who's applying to college, and not every single person you've asked for perspective. So whether you're using artificial intelligence, whether you're using friends or relatives to help you, I think at the end of the day, it's important to take a big step back and ask yourself, is this my writing? And do I feel as though I am putting my best foot forward and allowing these admissions officers to get to know me and who I am and what's important to me? So I want to end the slideshow with this one sentiment, that you can do it. I know at this point, the application process early in your senior year can feel overwhelming. You have many rigorous courses that you're taking in your senior year, and then you have college application on top of this. But if you plan ahead, give yourself time to breathe, to reflect, to start again, you are going to be in great shape. Do your research, ask questions when you need to, but also feel confident that you have the ability to move through this application process and put yourself out there in the most positive of ways. Embrace that revision process. I think English teachers, probably starting back in middle school, if not elementary school, were focused on making sure that you started something and you tried again. We know that you're only human, that you're going to make mistakes, but take that extra time to revise. And ultimately, it's only you who can write your story, and you are the most reliable narrator, and we're really interested in hearing that story from you. So with that, I am going to stop the screen share, and I will go into some of the questions that have come in. And I know that Libby has been answering as we've been going along, but I do encourage you to throw more questions in as you have them. And we'll try to get through a number of them in the next 15 minutes or so. So here is a question about the QuestBridge supplemental questions are the same as the Common App questions. The QuestBridge application is a little bit more layered. There are lots of additional places for you to write essays. And so it's a good idea to, if you are using the QuestBridge application, to look over those and see there are a number of shorter essays in addition to the longer personal statement. So you'll want to familiarize yourself with the specific prompts that QuestBridge uses if that's what you're going to be applying, using. Here is an interesting question. I was wondering if someone was to talk about a triggering topic such as sexual assault, but took that moment in their lives and talked more about themselves and showed their growth and how they grew to be a stronger person. I think ultimately at the end of your essay, we do want to hear about your growth, about how you have changed and grown up through a process or have a new outlook. If you have had different relationships that you want to talk about. And so if you feel as though trying to talk about a more challenging situation gives you the opportunity to be more honest, I would not steer you away from that. I think you want to be mindful of both your own trauma in writing that and what the reader and how the reader may interpret it. So I was wondering if someone talked about their growth from a bad moment in their life and showed how it influenced their future career and whether that would be a strong essay. we do want to see growth. I think, it depends the level of, as you say, bad moment, how bad you are reflecting on. But we do always love to be able to see how you've grown, see how you may be looking at your future in a way that this experience has enabled you to do. So. Is the personal statement graded in part by how accurately it responds to the given prompt, or can I write a response that covers a few? My advice here is, as I showed those 7 prompts, that number 7 allows you to respond to a question that you have asked yourself. And so I think there really is the opportunity to provide a story that doesn't necessarily respond to a prompt, but I would caution you that you want to make sure that you're not taking on more than you can chew. For instance, you want that essay to be able to be covered in those, or that topic to be able to be covered in those 650 words, as opposed to combining lots and lots of areas, questions into one space where you're back to skimming the surface as opposed to delving into a particular story. So, okay, you have lots of great questions here. I'm just taking a minute to try to make sense of them. What are the best things to write in the additional information? If my additional information covers more of my activities or description of the same, will it create an unprofessional impression? So the additional information probably is not the best place to include activities. We hope that that will be part of the activities section. The additional information, the way I've seen students use it in the past, perhaps you have had a really challenging health circumstance that you want to describe, or maybe you had a limitation to the classes you could take, and it's not information that your recommenders are going to be able to talk about in their letter. So something that we're not learning from you in other parts of the application. I do want to emphasize that not everyone will have information in that additional information section, and that is fine. It is certainly not a required part of the application. So I encourage you to use your own judgment to decide if, first of all, the information is not shared in other parts of the application. And if it's not shared, do you feel like your application would be incomplete without the sharing of that information? And hopefully those 2 questions could serve as a way for you to decide whether or not to share that. Okay, so how are personal essays judged? I think as admissions officers, we all read essays in different ways. We're all looking to be pulled into the voice of the student. We're looking to understand something about you. We are hoping to get a sense of maybe your sense of humor, maybe your values, maybe your excitement about coming to college at Bowdoin. Personal essays are looked at in a lot of different ways. As I hope I've shared tonight, it's the basics of, is the spelling and the grammar correct? Is the punctuation done appropriately? Are things capitalized? But then, does the story share something that you want to put forward? I often look for the judgment that students have used. What have you chosen to share with us? You'd be amazed by how many essays I've read about bathroom humor over the years. And let's just say I'm not sure that that always hits the mark. So you really need to think about what it is you want to share, and use your judgment in deciding what the best way to write a story that will pull us in. Okay. This is a great question. Is the story and character you demonstrate in your personal statement more important than the writing ability? For example, is it better to tell a strong story about character in straightforward, less flowery detail and language, or is a very well-written narrative that doesn't focus so much on personal character, but technical writing skill? So my response is probably not going to be very satisfying here. We want to see both. I think it's, ultimately you want it to be well written, but I hope at the end of a well-written essay, I am not having the response only to be that was well written. I hope I can say, that was a well-written essay, and I really enjoyed learning more about what this student values in friendships, or what the student thinks of as their greatest accomplishment, or what is something that they're really curious about learning more about. So trying to ensure an essay has both a very well-written style and a story or a message that comes through so we understand more about who you are. Are additional information such as resumes or recommendation letters actually read and considered in the application process? So, great question. Probably an important question to ask of the different schools to which you're applying. At Bowdoin, we will read additional recommendation letters. We ask you to have 2 letters of recommendation outside of your guidance counselor. One of those has to be from an academic teacher, and another can be from a teacher, but it could also be from someone in the community who knows you well. If you feel compelled to have a 3rd recommendation letter, my strongest encouragement is to ensure that that person is someone who knows you in a very different context than the people who wrote the other letters. To have, this is an extreme, but 4 or 5 letters from teachers who are all going to talk about how you excel in the classroom and little more is not giving that much additional information for us. So if, what the example I often use is if you have a part-time job, or maybe you are involved in a youth group for your church or your synagogue, if those people who see you in a very different context than your classroom teachers want to write a letter of recommendation for you, that could be really helpful. That being said, I don't think it's important for everybody to submit additional recommendation letters. You need to think about the pure volume of materials that you're submitting. In the same vein, if your resume is completely covered through the list of activities, there's no reason to submit a resume as well. We've already read it through your list of activities. So be thoughtful as you're thinking about additional information to submit. We want to get to know you, but we also feel as though through the application, we've provided lots of other ways to get to know you, and for you to throw additional information at us that has been shared in other capacities may not be overly helpful. Okay, can you provide some insight on how we should go about writing the Bowdoin supplement? So we have the offer on our website. You can get a sense of what the narrative of the offer and the various components that our 7th president thought were important in a Bowdoin education. And so we're curious about what resonates to you. There is a line about the arts. We see many students every year applying with a great strength and an interest in the arts. And That's always a wonderful way for us to see more about how you might contribute to life at Bowdoin. On the flip side, there is a line about being in the outdoors and taking advantage of nature. Given our location, there are lots of ways for students to take advantage of the natural world around them. We're curious as to what you will say in the supplemental essay. So I think that essay is interesting for us to read, not only in terms of the particular line you pick, but your interpretation of that line. And I would say over the years, we see lots of different ways that students have interpreted different lines, and your unique perspective can be a really enjoyable part of reading your application. All right, I have time for a few more here. Okay, some of these I think I got to earlier. Does Bowdoin track demonstrated interest? This is a great question. Demonstrated interest refers to colleges knowing and recognizing when you have attended information sessions, visited the campus, read the emails. Bowdoin does not track demonstrated interest. For us, the most important part in the application process is making sure that when you apply to Bowdoin, you understand where you're applying and the values that Bowdoin has. We want to make sure that you would be happy on our campus. And so we care less about whether you have attended countless number of virtual events or made your way to campus. And instead, we care more about whether you can see yourself being on our campus and how you're going to share that with us. Okay, we're getting into some more specific Bowdoin questions that I always love to answer. So hopefully we've talked enough about the writing that I can jump into these in the remaining minutes. What are some opportunities that are unique to Bowdoin in comparison to other liberal arts colleges? There are so many wonderful small liberal arts colleges out there. I think two things that set Bowdoin apart from others. First is our location. We are located in Mid-Coast Maine, and I think that provides not only the opportunity for some incredible research and study around issues of environmental studies, and climate change. It also gives you the opportunity to take advantage of this area from a recreation standpoint. The connection between Bowdoin College students and Brunswick residents is a really unique piece of life on campus that I think students, regardless of where you're coming from, can really benefit from getting to know the locals. And I think a second area is it goes back to one of the founding values of the college called the common good. There is a real sense that a feeling on campus that students are looking out for one another. There is the belief that your own education is not as important as making sure that everyone is feeling connected and part of this larger community. And you see students really looking out for one another, for faculty, for staff. There's a real sense of kindness and generosity. And I think that sentiment within the student body is something that is a really nice factor about life on the Bowdoin campus. So with that, I know I have not gotten to all of your questions, and I know that Libby did a wonderful job of answering some of these, and you just threw too many at us. But I want to thank you all so much for joining us this evening, and appreciate that questions still remain. You should feel free to reach out to me later. My email is mswift@bowdoin.edu. But thank you again for joining tonight, and I wish you all the best. Take good care.